this video, we will discuss the basic supplies that you will need to begin to sew and talk about kinds of fabric to buy for making the 12 projects in this course. Of course, the main piece of equipment that you'll need is a sewing machine in good working order. Don't try to learn to sew on a machine that is not working correctly, so make sure you've got one that's running well before you start. The other major piece of equipment you'll need is an iron that's working well, an ironing board, and a sleeve board is very helpful if you'd like to add that to your supplies. One thing I'd like to mention about the iron is after many years of ironing, I have decided that my favorite iron for using these kinds of projects is just a mid-grade iron. Like a $30 iron is really fine. You don't need a really big, expensive, fancy one. And if you use distilled water in it, it will keep going for much longer. Basic supplies are usually called notions. One of the main supplies that you'll need is thread. There's lots of different threads on the market, and you'll want to think about what your purpose is, what you're going to be sewing whenever you choose your thread. If you're sewing on cotton, people often recommend using all cotton thread to sew on all cotton fabric. If you're sewing on any synthetic, people recommend most using polyester threads for that. So you want to try to match your fiber of your thread to the fiber that you're going to be sewing. There's many different brands of sewing thread. Some of the American-made threads I've used for many years. I've not had any problem with them, but some machines are very sensitive, and many of the machines are made in Europe, and the European threads are said to sew much better and have less trouble on those kind of sewing machines. So you might want to check into looking for the Gutermann and the Mettler threads are made in Europe and are high-quality threads that many people do prefer. The main kind of thread I would say not to use is to not use old thread that's from Aunt Susie's sewing box that you inherited. Don't use that old thread because it may be brittle. Really cheap quality thread can break and cause a lot of problems in your tension. So I would say to use the best thread that you can afford. The spool pins on your basic machine are usually made to fit this kind of a spool. If you do choose to use a spool of thread that's larger than the standard one that was developed for your sewing machine, a thread stand works much better for feeding through your machine. Another thread that I would say to avoid to use for sewing is a serger thread. Serger thread is excellent for serging, but it is a bad choice for sewing with the machine because it has one ply less than good quality sewing thread. One of your most basic supplies that you'll be using are pins. And there's many different kinds of pins on the market. I find that I use these the most. They're extra long. They're easy to pick up with a large head on them. But sometimes you're sewing with things that are fine fabric. These are a finer head pin. They're a glass head pin, so that if you do use the pins with an iron, they won't melt. The other kinds of pins will melt. So this is nice because it has a glass head. It still has a nice long shaft, but it has a very fine shaft. So it's a very nice quality pin for using especially for clothing sewing and for very accurate pinning. This is a very nice kind of pin to use. You also need a pin cushion. The magnetic ones are very nice. This is a standard one that's been around for a long time. This one's a very nice one because it makes the pins parallel to each other, so it makes them very nice to pick them up. You can also use, of course, a regular pin cushion, but these are the ones that I prefer to use. You'll also be using bobbins for your thread. You want to make sure that you use the right bobbin for your machine. Do check on that. When you go to the store, it'll say on the package what kind of machine it's used for. You must use the right size bobbin for what you're doing. And this is a nice little bobbin holder. I recommend getting something. There's all different kinds that you can get, but that will hold your bobbins. But I would say you'd probably want to start with 1 or 2 dozen bobbins because you'll need one for every color thread that you'll be sewing with. Another basic supply, of course, is your scissors. You'll need a larger pair of scissors for cutting out fabric. And there's different brands. I would say get the very best that you can on scissors. You want really good working scissors, and you don't want to leave them around where your little boy can cut out paper with them, because that does dull them. I also wanted to show you that there's different sizes of scissors. If you have small hands, if you're teaching children, or if you have small hands, this is a standard size scissor. But you can see this is 8-inch and this is a 7-inch. It's much smaller, and so smaller hands can handle this kind of scissor better. You'll also want a smaller pair of scissors that you'll use at your sewing machine that will just help you to cut threads. You just need something small. There's no need to have the big heavy pair of scissors at your sewing machine, and I like to use a small pair of scissors there. Some of your other basic supplies is needles. Now, there's many different kinds of needles, and it can be a little confusing to somebody but brand new to sewing. But the needle is very, very important for your sewing machine. You want to get the right kind for your machine, and you also want to get the right size for the thread and the fabric that you're sewing on. For instance, if you're sewing on upholstery fabric or you're sewing on denim, you want to use a very heavy needle. It's often called a jeans or denim needle. There's different numbers on the bottom of the different kinds of packages. There's one number that's going to be a metric number that they use in Europe, and the other is the American number. So this is the jeans needle. In this brand is a 16. That's a size 16 needle or a size 100 needle, depending on which your manual tells you to use for your sewing machine. It's the same size needle. It's just the American and the metric. If you're sewing on something that's fine, on very fine fabric, you'll want to use a smaller needle. I recommend a size 12 or a 14 for sewing most things for your sewing machine. 12 is a little bit finer, and it's a very nice needle. It's a little bit smaller, has a little bit smaller eye, so if you want something a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier fabric, or you just want to have a little bit bigger hole so you can see to thread it, you can go up to a 14. There's also ballpoint needles. You want to avoid those for woven fabrics. We're just going to be working with woven fabrics in this curriculum, but sometimes people have ballpoints they don't know what they're for, but they are for sewing on knits. There's also many other kinds of needles that you'll learn as you sew that you might want to try some different kinds of needles, but these are the very basic ones. Size 12 and 14 will be all you would need really probably to sew on this on the things in this level. Another very, very important tool in sewing is this thread ripper. If you sew, you will find that you have to pick out some seams every once in a while. There's all kinds. These are really very inexpensive, but I find they roll off and they're hard to find sometimes, but this is my very most favorite seam ripper. It's very thin, it's very sharp, and it never rolls off. You'll also need some things for turning corners and poking corners out. Now, you don't necessarily have to go buy something for that. They have some very nice ones. These work very well. This is my favorite one, but there's all different kinds. A crochet hook works. I had this little poker that came from somewhere that works too. Sometimes I've even used a pencil. If I just turn the lead back, I've used that to poke with. The main thing you want to remember in poking corners is don't use your scissors because you might poke right through your fabric. So it's better to have some kind of a tool handy that you can use for poking out corners. We also use this sometimes for turning things and poking out corners. This is a very nice tool. It's not necessary, but it is very handy, and it's one of my favorite notions. You'll also need something that's called a bodkin. It's been around for a long time. It's something to help you thread through elastic and things into a casing. This is a very nice little, very simple, very workable bodkin. There's all kinds of others. There's endless varieties of things like that. But I'll have to say that most of the girls that we sew with, most of the ladies, prefer a large safety pin. So this will work just fine. You don't have to get those unless you want to. You'll need some kind of little rulers for when we turn up the hems on things. These are metal seam gauges. These are really nice. You can iron on them. There won't be a problem with that. You can move them to set the mark. Some people use a little acrylic ruler like this. It's very accurate. It's very easy to see what you're doing, but you have to be careful because it can melt. On the project videos, we'll also show you a way that's even better than this for marking things to iron. So you'll learn that in the different projects. On marking tools, you'll need something to mark your fabric with, and there are just dozens and dozens and dozens of different kinds. I think I've probably bought all of them trying to find the perfect one. I can't say that I've really found the perfect one that has everything I want in it, but I do have some thoughts on some things. There's no right or wrong on what you want. You just have to think about what you're going to do, what you're going to be marking. Do I want it? Am I going to be ironing over it right away? Do I want it to, am I marking on the back of it that it doesn't matter what it looks like, it doesn't matter, or am I marking on the front and I can't wash it? So you'll have to learn to ask yourself questions so that you'll know which marking tool do I want. Probably the least expensive ones are going to be something along the line of a pencil. They have chalk pencils. There's ones that they call water-soluble pencils. One thing I do not recommend, I don't find a need for it really too much, are colored pencils. They are very hard if you ever do want to get the mark out. They are the hardest to get the mark out. So I actually don't too much use colored pencils. If I use a pencil, I'm going to use one that's a water-soluble one that's white. And you will need a nice little sharpener to keep them sharp. Another pencil that I use is just a basic mechanical pencil. I have to say this is probably my most favorite marking tool. Just a simple pencil. I like this mechanical. It always has a nice sharp point, and I find myself using this very often. Another marking utensil that is very handy to have are these kinds of markers. What's nice about them is that these purple ones will actually disappear with air. You don't have to use water or anything to get them out. They'll just disappear on their own. The package says they'll last for 12, 24 hours. I found that they sometimes will disappear in maybe as fast as 20 minutes if you're in a humid environment. So your different pens and the different fabric will actually mark different also. There's also a blue pen. And this comes off with water. You can spritz it with water. You can wash it. You can use a damp rag to get the marks off. The main thing to know about blue pens is that you should not iron over it before you get the mark out, because it can leave a residual mark on there. Some people prefer not to use pens like this because they're concerned about, is the residue, the chemical that's in it, going to appear later on. I have not had any experience with that happening, but I think it is possible, especially if you iron over it before you get the mark out. Now, there are two different kinds of, there's a lot of brands for these kinds of pens, but there is also the ones that are like this have a much finer point. If you look at them, they're a very fine point. The drawback to them is that they don't last as long as this style pen lasts a lot longer than this style pen. But this style pen has a very fine point, where this has a very wide point. So if you're marking very precise things, this works a little better. And it also has less chemical going in because the line is finer than this style pen. Now there's also some other kind of mechanical type pencils. There's ones that have different colors and different kinds, and they have some special kinds of erasers that help erase them. If you do want to get something out, they can come out. They do take a little bit of effort, and sometimes using erasers will kind of rough up your fabric a little bit. So these are very nice, very exact, precise kinds of pencils, but I find that what I would use them for, I can also use this for. However, this is really going to be almost impossible to erase out, where this can be erased out with some effort. So you can make that choice on what you'd like to use. Another kind of pencil is a fine graphite pencil that some people like this kind of thing, but it has the same issues as the other graphite. Graphite is sometimes hard to get out. Even if it says this will come out with water, I have a hard time really getting them out without messing up the fabric. Some other markers that are very nice. Soapstone is a very nice marking pencil. It comes out with water. It's very easy to use, but it does break easily, and some people prefer not to mess with that for that reason. Another very, very nice marking utensil is to use a chalk pencil of some sort. There's all different brands, all different styles of them. This one is my favorite, but what it does is it just marks a chalk line, and I can even mark a chalk line, and it brushes right off. And so I really like this because it's so easy to brush off. One of the oldest marking tools is Taylor's chalk, and this works very well for most of the things that we'll be using. It's pretty inexpensive, so this is another option for those who like to use that. So there's many kinds of marking tools. There's many more even than what I've shown you here. As you sew and as you work on different projects, you'll find that you'll find your own favorites. My favorites that I end up finding myself using over and over again are these right here. These are my favorites. Another tool that's nice to have in your sewing box is masking tape. This comes off really easily and it doesn't leave a residue on your machine, and I'll use it sometimes for making seam guides that I want it for a different measurement that's what's actually on my machine. You'll also want to have some good quality sewing machine oil. You never want to cut your corners on oil. Don't ever use something from your husband's garage to oil your machine. Only use high quality sewing machine oil. You'll need some kind of a lint brush to clean out your machine because it will get linty. You'll need some kind of a little screwdriver that will work with your machine. And then an iron cleaner is very nice for if you ever get something on your iron where it has a drag to it. This iron cleaner is very handy. I use it frequently. Some other very nice tools to have are rotary cutters, a rotary cutting mat, and rulers to use with your rotary cutters. They're very accurate, makes a very accurate cut, very neat, very clean edge, and I recommend it very much for cutting out these projects. It's also used a lot in quilting, but you can use it a lot for other kinds of sewing as well. If you choose not to do that, and you don't want to invest in that, or for whatever reason you have, you can use just a regular cardboard mat for cutting out. This is very nice for cutting out garments and things. And one of the project videos will be cutting out an apron, and this will be very nice for that. If you don't want to use the rotary cutter, you'll need to make some kind of a pattern, which you can use. You can buy this with the interfacing at the store. It has a 1-inch grid marks, and so that you can make your own pattern. If we need something that's 3 inches by 18 inches, that could be cut out this way, or you could just mark this off. It's in 1-inch increments, and you can make your own pattern 3 inches by 18 inches and pin it on. So you do have an option. You don't have to go that route if you don't want to. You can also make patterns out of tissue paper. That's a little thin. We often use this kind of paper for making patterns. It's the same kind of paper they use on a doctor's examining table, and it has a little bit thicker than tissue paper, so it works very well for making your own patterns. Of course, really nice patterns that you're going to use a lot, that you're going to repeatedly want to use over and over again. You can actually make your pattern on fabric or on interfacing. So while there's an abundance of notions that you can use for sewing to make things go easier and things that you like to work with, these are the basic ones that we recommend for using for sewing this course. You'll need some good quality sewing thread, bobbins, and you'll need colors to match the projects that you'll be working with. Some shears for cutting things out, and some smaller scissors for cutting threads at the machine. You'll need some good quality sewing machine needles. Size 12 and 14 are the main sizes that we recommend. You'll need a few hand sewing needles. You'll need some basic pins and a pin cushion of some style. You'll need some marking utensils, and we like these three probably the best, though there's others do have their place. A good quality seam ripper, some kind of a bodkin or safety pin to thread your things through your casings. A point turner of some sort, small rulers to work for ironing with and marking seams. You'll need a masking tape for marking seam guides, oil, screwdriver, and lint brush for cleaning your machine, sewing machine, iron and ironing board. We highly recommend the rotary cutter system with a mat, a rotary cutter, and a ruler for cutting out the projects, and this is what we use in this course, we demonstrate with. If you choose not to use the rotary cutting system, you can also make your patterns using a cardboard mat that's used for cutting out fabric and garments with, and work that with your paper or tissue paper for cutting out your own patterns, or you can use this pattern paper with a 1-inch grid on it to make your patterns. We will make most of the projects for this course out of light to medium weight cotton fabric. Some of them will be made with a drapery weight fabric, like for the shoe bag we used a drapery weight fabric that has a little heavier feel to it. It has a nice body to it, so it has a nice shape fit for some bags. We'll also be using some upholstery fabric for making the flange pillow and the tote bag. There's many different kinds of upholstery fabric. Not all of them are going to be suitable. Some of them are really heavy, so if there's anything that's really heavy, I'd avoid that. Some of them have kind of a plastic backing on it, and you want to avoid something like that. So, and then some of them also have a feel to them that feel kind of plasticky or nylonish. I would avoid those and just stick with something that has a nice soft, actually what we call is a hand to it. It has a very nice soft feel to it. I'd stick with those. That'd be the safest in beginning. There's a place for some of those other things, and you can learn that as you go along. The other thing I'd like to say about the fabrics is that stripes and plaids are often look very nice, but if you want to work with a stripe or plaid, you need to be willing to take the time to cut it out a little more carefully, trying to get it along the straight so that it looks nice. Another thing to watch for is directional fabric. Like on this has a direction to it. This upholstery fabric has a direction. So when you're cutting out something that has a directional fabric, you have to take a little more care to make sure that the upside of the pattern is up on your fabric.